As far as I'm concerned, as long as that same respect and recognition is not shown toward every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me. And during the few moments that we have left, we want to have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me. Us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
As we are still reeling back from the moments that we all witnessed, which is an insurrection, which was an insurrection on the Capitol building, the word that is popping around, you'll be amiss if you have not seen or heard the word, the F word, as it were, being touted around from news station to news station, the F word, the fascist word. So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Aaron, was this a fascist moment in what we saw in Trump?
I like the term the F word. It's one of many F words that's come up in the past in the context of the culture wars, if we can call it that. Was it a fascist moment? Well, I guess I would say a lot of people seem to think so. And it is a term that's been used quite often. And there, as I think many of us know, there's been a lot of debates about that on social media and amongst the commentariat. I think there were absolutely some fascist elements and some fascist implications of this. I guess I would say beyond the overt kind of swastika wearing, Auschwitz camp t-shirt wearing crew, but the absolute anti-democratic nature of it. And although many of those who have been described as protesters or rioters, the mob, have been claiming to do so in the name of democracy and liberty.
Yes.
Very, very specifically and ideologically defined. And it's typical of the American far right, particularly in a sort of a post-revolutionary discourse, post-American revolutionary discourse. They seek, or were seeking, to overturn a democratic election and maintain the authority of an authoritarian leader. But I think, and one which was organized around a relationship, well, not blood and soil, obviously, as a sort of white settler colonial nation, but actually a sort of a white nativist, white supremacist order. I think the key to that, there's three things I'd want to say. I think we need to acknowledge the fact that people will throw around the word fascist for the purposes of emphasis to indict Trump.
Yes.
And indict his followers as something so extreme and beyond the pale. And I want to come back to that. But there's also obviously parsing of the accurate use of the term fascism and the accurate sort of historical legacies, et cetera, which I don't necessarily want to get into because I don't want it to become a theoretical or historical debate necessarily. But it's also, and whether what's happening now could be a threat to American democracy and see us go down the path of Nazi Germany and sort of wider Europe, Italy under fascism. I don't think that is the case. I don't think that is the danger. And I think the use of fascism can often be so extreme, with another term, sedition, that puts this so beyond the pale that has the function of separating what is being done, the extreme manifestation of Trumpism, if you will, from the very nature of American history and American democracy and the mainstream. And I think that's very problematic because for the past number of years, we've been told that Trump followers represent a democratic mandate. The left behind, the demos, the people. And somewhere between these two extremes of this is what Americans represent, and this is a small band of extremists, comes the fact that it seems to be there was an overlap or alignment with the police and security. And I think that's really where the fascism comes in, when actually you have this complete meeting of the extreme or extremist elements, the state security apparatus, law enforcement, and executive power.
Absolutely. I mean, as someone has been invested in researching, in your book, Reactionary Democracy, and have been studying kind of, populist movements, was this moment predictable in your eyes?
Well, it's interesting because, in a sense, I wouldn't call it a populist movement. And I think populism, as Aurelian and I have discussed in our work, is the use of the term populism to describe what is often sort of like far right, overtly
Yes.
like racist and fascistic elements is actually a way of making it seem like it has a democratic mandate, like it represents the
Okay.
people. And
Yes.
now everyone's trying to deny that fact. So that's quite interesting. After years
Yeah.
of normalizing it through the term populism, despite the stigmas attached to populism, because it was always a stigmatizing discourse as much as it was a pseudo democratizing one, I think that, yeah, I guess now everyone's trying to kind of cut their losses, if you will.
Yes.
And what worries me about, again, the term fascism is that it creates this idea of some element that is now severed from the demos, severed, or some demos, I don't use that term, the mainstream.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
Yeah, and I just want to kind of unpacking and researching the far right, and
yeah. So
was it a totally kind of predictable moment for people?
sorry,
Was this
yes, of
bound to
course.
happen?
Yeah, I tend not to do predictions, I guess.
Okay.
And I guess, sorry, I sort of like, I got caught up in the populism thing and I sort of didn't finish up with what you were asking. I guess I would say is that what we argued is that there was this mainstreaming, legitimization, and emboldening of the far right. I mean, we always argued the idea of rendering these kind of elements or this type of racism and far right ideas as populist, democratic, or even the liberal platforming of them was always going to turn on its head. And the illiberalism, which was concealed within those narratives and discourses, was going to be legitimized and come out. And in a sense, this is not new. We've been seeing far right and extreme right, violence, plots, threats, hate crimes, all on the increase. I mean, even the FBI and Homeland Security have been warning about this. But it's important for me that we don't let that, as serious as it is, distract from where it came from, what enabled it, and what will continue to be in power or have power when it is discarded from the American kind of imagination and memory.
Yeah, so let's answer those questions then. So where did it come from and what enabled it?
Well, I mean, just in terms of the prediction thing, I also want to say that many experts did predict something was going to happen. And I hesitate to, because I don't know what's in the minds of every actor, but I also don't know how the security services are going to react in a way that will prevent something from happening or enable or allow it. And I think what we saw here is not just a group of extremists, a group of Trumpists decided to do something, but actually they were able to do something further than most people would have imagined, because no one would have thought the Capitol would be that open access, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you asked where it came from. In a lot of my work and my work with Aurelian Mondon and others, Katie Brown, for example, as well, we look at the mainstreaming of the far right and far right ideas. And I think over the last number of years, we've not just seen a normalization of racism and far right ideas around immigration, around Muslims, around borders, around cultural and so-called civilizational debates about, but you have liberals saying we have to debate these ideas. You have mainstream media saying, well, if we're going to give the left-wing side, we have to give the far-right side. And what was interesting about this, they rarely gave the left-wing side. Left-wing side was usually caricatured as woke snowflakes,
cultural Marxist.
Cultural Marxist, yeah. And it's interesting because cultural Marxist is where you saw the fascism come in, because that was always a sort of like it's an anti-Semitic kind of fascistic kind of conspiracy theory. Exactly. But you had these sort of like liberals saying, I believe this, the far right's bad. And then other liberals going, well, we need to hear their side. Otherwise, we're not going to dig down and expose bad ideas. And you keep on exposing bad ideas, exposing bad ideas, exposing bad ideas, until the point where, like, instead of being defeated, they were completely normalized. You don't need to have Generation Identity, Tommy Robinson, Richard Spencer, Steve Bannon, promoting their ideas on BBC, on whatever news outlet. And these are not...
A side point then, are you saying you support deplatforming certain individuals then?
Yeah, well, I support no platforming as a sort of strategy against sort of fascist, racists, etc. in institutions. Deplatforming would be the sort of social media one where you take away someone's right to a platform.
Yeah, you
You take
cancel
them
them.
off of a platform. Yeah, so Trump was deplatformed.
Yes.
Yeah, no platforming would be a form of sort of activist things. Do I support that? Yes. I mean, I don't think these are people who deny the right to exist of others. These are not equal ideas in a marketplace of ideas.
What would you say an equal idea is? And then again, my point, where is the benchmark for this? For example, would we deplatform the likes of Ben Shapiro, for example?
Well, I guess I would turn to the idea of would we deplatform? I mean, Ben Shapiro has his own media sort of little empire, right? So,
Yeah.
so and Ben Shapiro doesn't have a right to speak at Berkeley. He may be invited, but
Yes.
it's not a democratic right to be in an institution and speak. You can protest. I would say that one of the problems with this, the anti-cancel culture argument,
Yes.
it constructs something which is I don't think is real. The idea that there's a culture of cancellation. I think you find far more censorship on the right and amongst reactionaries, but also it constructs an idea that people are losing a platform they have a right to have, and and in this construction they're denying the free speech rights of protesters to protest this. I mean, I don't run an institution. I don't make the policy. Would I protest a fascist speaking? Yes.
But then, what do you think about these tech companies and the likes of Twitter kind of banning Trump at the 11th hour? And I don't know. I'm not sure if that's really any cause for praise.
Well, I guess the question I would ask you is that because it's the last hour, or is it because you don't think they should do it? And if you don't think they should do it, is that because you think there'll be a backlash, or you think it's undemocratic?
Brilliant questions. I would say that because at the 11th hour, I would say that now it seems, oh, this was the final straw, when for so many for so long has saw the rhetoric in which he was espousing and the incitement, literally the literal incitement. So I feel like now doing it in 11th hour is like, okay, a bit little too late. I kind of feel it's a bit hypocritical of those on the right and those who are, openly so pro-capitalist to say that this is against our freedom of speech. I'm thinking, well, the market does what the market does, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like these are private these are private tech companies, and besides where I might stand philosophically on whether things should be cancelled or not, this is these people are pro-capitalist people, and they say the market decides what the market decides, and there should be limited government interference. So if that's what the market has decided, that's their pejorative. That's kind of where I see it anyway. I think kind of them doing it at the last at the 11th hour was a bit, for me, too little too late. And I do think as well, kind of answering what he said afterwards, it does embolden the people who say, look, they're trying to cancel us from speaking.
I'm in complete agreement. I wasn't trying to turn the tables. I'm really sure. But I guess, okay, I'm in total agreement. I mean, it's like, this is what I wonder about this idea that there's like this fascist takeover America. And I'm thinking, that's where the line is drawn? You have to actually occupy the Capitol in order to get turfed off Twitter. And then someone's going to go like, yeah, well, the Twitter thing is undemocratic. And the problem is what you have effectively is a right-wing, a far-right talking head who's operating under the guise of libertarianism.
Yeah.
Who's never sure whether his, like, I mean, on some kinds, like, the racism of a lot of the libertarians is couched in this idea that corporations shouldn't have to hire anyone they don't want to. It's like this, the relationship very odd and awkward, right? But it works. But I guess the thing is that I have thought for a lot of them, particularly the libertarian and the sort of the free market enablers and legitimizers, for them, it was often at least half or more about capitalism. And what was, so, they defend Danmore with the Google letter. It becomes about protecting capitalism from anti-racism. And in a sense, because they had conflated anti-racism with socialism, these were, it's two birds, right? They were protecting it. And some of them, I don't know what they thought the exact relationship was, but it's also funny that, all the sort of like, sort of the Marxists who don't like identity politics. So, but the interesting thing I find is they feel, and I think this started a lot with Kaepernick. The Danmore letter in Google and then Kaepernick, the idea that capitalists were betraying their enablers and enforcers. And a lot of like intellectual dark web and others, they saw themselves as defenders of capitalism. Now, the whiteness, the white civilizational, the Enlightenment discourse. They were defending it. It's racist, it's chauvinistic, it's misogynist, but they also thought they were doing it in the service of capitalism. They didn't
Mm,
think they didn't think there was like a big separation between the two.
okay.
So what we have is, and you see this discourse a lot about woke capitalism.
Yes.
They seem to feel angrier at capitalism for folding, allegedly,
Yes.
not realizing at any given point, and knowing all the the anti-racist and left-wing critiques of sort of capitalist anti-racism,
Yeah.
right? That effectively this was the market coming to bear. I mean, these companies are making marketing and economic decisions at the same time, right? They're not going all of a sudden like, I have changed my entire view about inequality. In fact, a lot of times this becomes a distraction from the inequality that they are built upon and perpetuate.
Exactly. Exactly. What I would say then, we saw a lot of the time people were saying that economic anxiety. I know that in our episode before we kind of
Mm.
unpacked the myth of the left behind, but I'd like to go into it again. When people say, "Oh, this is just people who are, you know, they suffer from economic anxiety," what would be your response to that?
Oh, I'd be curious who they're talking about. We
I mean,
see
it's talking
the
about the white working class, isn't it? That's what normally
oh
categorized as people.
yes, well, I mean they're talking definitely about the white working class, but I think we discussed this earlier as well. The idea that what they're doing is they're it's like a Trojan horse of sorts, and it's fairly obvious. It's like a see-through Trojan horse that they're basically bringing in this victimization, white grievance culture, often white male grievance
Yeah,
culture, in through this idea that it's the white working class left behind by the forces of globalization. Although they sometimes slip up and call it globalism, which is a bit of a hint, or neoliberalism and everything. And it's almost this pseudo sociology of white grievance.
yes,
And and this is also why, I mean, Aurelian and I discussed at length about the role of social scientists and political scientists who are enabling this. But the idea is you bring it in, and if you look closely, I mean, you look at the voting for Trump, or you look at, I mean, the socioeconomic status or identities of many of the people at the Capitol.
yeah,
These were not the disenfranchised. But
absolutely.
but it also, and neither is Trump, neither is
I mean,
Farage.
if
Yeah.
you can take a flight and check yourself into a hotel and storm the Capitol, you're not disenfranchised.
Or the son of a judge, and you know,
Exactly,
I
exactly.
understand there was an Olympic athlete. There was there was allegedly undercover police and military.
That doesn't surprise me at all, which
No,
says a
no,
lot. I mean,
and
for me,
raises serious
that was
questions.
a, and again, I'm not sure. AOC did a live last night, actually, Instagram live, speaking about her experience, and she said that the panic buttons were removed from the offices, and there's a lot of questions as to why
Oh, really?
it was so overrun so quickly. And she speaks, not even to be sounding conspiratorial, but she spoke about a loads of question marks. And I think undoubtedly, like, it would not surprise me if there's law enforcement involved. I mean, overwhelmingly law enforcement are supporters of Trump. I mean,
Yeah,
that's not conspiracy. That's a fact. So I think that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest, which is very worrying, actually. I mean, like, we didn't know, but I think just for it to be brought out so obvious, I think it's very worrying. But for me, if I'm honest, I think if ever abolitionists needed an advert for their cause, that,
yeah,
that there it was handed to them in the form of the insurrection. Because either policing doesn't work in the way it should do, in the way people say it does,
yeah.
or money should be reallocated to different places to ensure public safety. Because clearly, policing isn't it. So yeah,
Yeah.
carry on.
I mean, I saw this on Twitter afterwards. Like, I mean, a lot of people going, "You can't reform this." Now, I would say, just going back to the sort of the left behind thing. I think one of the things that this was a guise for was people, white men often, right
Yeah.
wingers anyway, who were worried about their loss of privilege. And
Yes.
we know it for a lot of these people with a lot of privilege, power, and the assumptions of privilege and power, they simultaneously, oh, and I should note, white working class is also sort of an argument for sort of like, not in the sort of fascist blood and soil, but like a sort of American frontier settler and even white immigrant labor authenticity, salt of
Mm,
the, earth. But I would say that the people who have the assumptions of power and privilege, for them it's a zero-sum game. So, Obama gets elected and everything's gone. Civil
Yeah.
rights, desegregation, any given point in a far-right mobilization, and there's been several particular historical points, they've almost always been predicated on an alteration to the sort of the racial order of things, not even radical
Yeah.
or revolutionary in a lot of cases, but actually abolition of slavery. As radical as that may be, it's not as if it was like a democratic revolution where black people had power afterwards. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? But any inkling is a loss and an opportunity for mobilization. The exception to that would be, ironically, in the 1930s, the emergence of American fascism
Yes.
is the Depression era
Yeah.
mobilizations, which were not predicated on something specifically about sort of black rights, whereas the civil rights era was, the Reconstruction was. But I guess the other thing was that the white working class left behind thing seemed to legitimize the grievance. It gave
Yeah.
it some material basis or reality.
Exactly. And kind of you analyzing what we're seeing in the UK then. I mean, I know you don't like predictions, but where are we in the UK? If you were to give a snapshot in terms of the politics, the kind of the far right movements, and how far are we from America in terms of what we're seeing in the ground in the UK?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I wouldn't mind actually also coming back to the police thing, if you don't mind,
Okay, yeah,
because
let's
you raised some issues that I
let's
find
do
really
that. Let's do that.
fascinating.
Yeah, let's
But
do that.
I'm happy to do the British one first, if you want.
Okay, no, let's go reverse. Let's go for the police one again. So, what's your thoughts on the policing and the carceral state?
So I'm just, as a criminologist, yeah, there's a couple of things I wanted to raise, because there's been a lot of things people saying that the different response of the police capital in comparison to Black Lives Matter
Yes.
is evidence of racism,
Hmm.
institutional racism in police. And I guess I would say, I think it goes so much deeper and so much more insidious, because what we saw was not just a completely brutal, violent crackdown on Black Lives Matter, but the
Hmm.
police were both in lockstep with Trump
Yes.
and were backed by the far right. So
Mm.
when you see the relationship between these three parties at the Capitol,
Yes.
that's where it becomes extremely worrying. And I would say, the police, the far right, and Trump can overlap in cultural and ideological affiliations and identifications.
Yes.
Patriotism, defense of the nation,
Yes.
conservatism, masculinity, law and
Yes.
order. But it's what I find also interesting about this is the assumption that Black Lives Matter, and this is about this whole systemic racism argument,
Yeah.
that the right thinks, by calling it systemic racism and them calling Black Lives Matter extremists, that they are fighting an organization or a movement that wants to destroy America. So these actors cannot imagine they're destroying America. They think they're defending it, and they
Yeah.
also think they're defending it in conjunction with Trump and the police, who also think they're defending American institutions,
Yes.
even when they're not. But what's quite interesting about it is the assumption that Black Lives Matter and anti-racist activists, and I think Black people in general, are a threat before they do anything,
Hmm.
and the assumption that the far right almost needs to has legitimate grievance and should let off some steam
Oh,
is
yes.
a complete white supremacist racist kind of schema. And the
Yes.
reason I'm raising this is partly because there is not the evidence of Black Lives Matter's sort of violent insurgency against America, but there is
Exactly.
absolute consistent evidence that the far right, despite defending the system and being in in support of and enabled by the president
Yeah.
and possibly elements in the police, the far right has been often anti-government, anti-federal
Exactly.
government in terms of Reconstruction or civil rights or desegregation, but also in the 1980s and 90s, they were militias were forming, federal buildings and police and IRS agents were being attacked,
Yep.
and even that history is not enough to make the police worry about these these types.
Exactly.
And I think so. And that doesn't answer the carceral question, but I do worry, I should say, that if we turn to criminalization and securitization
Yes.
of the far right, it's already set up to crack down harder on Black Lives Matter and Antifa.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way that the very same COINTELPRO, HUAC investigations and arrests of Klan members in the 1960s came from the COINTEL program and HUAC, which went after the left and civil rights activists, and then it was used against the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground and others right after. Their focus on the right has been temporary. And if there's a crackdown, criminalization, securitization of social and political movements in general, the very organizations and movements that have been fighting against this racism and fascism that no one else seemed to pay attention to or care about until it occupied the capital will be harmed. And I think that's an important
that's a
issue.
very important point. The kind of securitization of Black Lives Matter and the far right, because I mean we know COINTELPRO systematically, destroyed the kind of freedom fighters, revolutionaries that were fighting against this kind of racism and fascism. But the actual active. So it's very interesting now. I'm seeing the dichotomy in my head when I'm seeing that the people that were trying to make the country more democratic were the people that are cracked down upon. But the people that are the people that were very testing the limits of democracy and trying to actually kind of destroy democracy are not seen as not viewed in the same way. And that's the kind of racism that's imbued. And that's when we say systemic racism and you can't reform this ish. This is what we're talking about. It's so embedded. But I do want to kind of press you again on Britain. What's the state of the right now, and I won't say where it's going. I know you don't like predictions, but where are we at now?
Yeah, well, I mean, where we are a lot of British media and politicians wagging their fingers at America being so and Trump being so dangerous and everything's so bad. And I mean, it often makes me think about, the very history of sort of the, I guess, the sort of the post-colonial, post sort of war era. And even during the Second World War, this idea that Britain always seeing America as having this sort of like this problem with racism and political or cultural irrationality. I mean, even Enoch Powell's speech
Rivers of Blood.
Rivers of Blood was also about America having a problem and it coming over here, as if. And I'm not saying that the problem was identifying is a problem, right? But what I'm saying is that like there's always been this idea that America has this kind of violent sort of race problem, if you will. And I'm doing air quotes here. And you're going to bring it over here as if this country hasn't engaged in sort of like horrific racist violence globally, right?
Exactly.
Now, the reason I say this is not in any way to defend or recover any virtue of America, but importantly, it's serving as a distraction or as a sort of cleansing of the body politic, because so we have a right-wing government that is traded in racism, austerity, inequality, injustice, and legitimized, enabled, and treated Trump very, very sort of like very well, right?
Yes.
With great respect. And now they have to kind of clean their house. But they treated him well because they have, I think, a lot of the same politics. But they also have, money and sort of military kind of issues that the far right, far right capitalism and militarism,
hand in hand.
So what's happening? I think there's often a displacement onto America of problems that exist here. I mean, we shouldn't forget that during the big protests in the spring and the summer, we had protests against statues and monuments to slave traders and sort of, white supremacists. And America, the government here and the government there were both defending these monuments and opposing protesters. And then you have this thing, and this is what interesting to me, the protests around Parliament defending statues.
Yeah.
And other places. We're not that distant to the politics and identifications of those in the offices in Parliament. But of course we could stigmatize those as working class, far right, etc. And not that the far right doesn't deserve stigmatization, but what's happened here, these alignments between those in power and those who are deemed to have no power and legitimate grievance, and are often the street soldiers for the
Actually,
establishment.
very represented in the politics then.
Yeah, oh, totally. And so what's going to happen, right? So we see these images of far right protesters in Britain. We go like, oh, look at them; they're just beyond the pale, all this kind of stuff. But they don't have the different ideas and identifications and defenses as those in power. But then you look over what's happening in America. The displacement continues. The British government, people here displace racism onto the working class, right,
Yeah.
or the constructed working class. The British elite and wider population may displace it onto America. Americans are now displacing it onto Trump and this mob.
No one wants
Yeah.
to kind of look in their own house. I think the language of Malcolm X, I mean, no matter what happens, chickens will always come home to roost. I think that's a very poignant point. But I wanna kind of just,
Yeah.
I have another F word for you, and I don't want to go into
Oh
it too
no.
much. But I want to ask, what is the British government's beef with Foucault? Very briefly.
Oh wow. That's so. Oh well. So sorry, I'm laughing because I'm remembering back when I was a student.
Yeah.
And we had all these debates. It was the first time I came to this country. I was doing my master's in
Yeah.
philosophy and social theory. And in one building were all the Foucauldians and Deleuzians and Derridians, and the other one were the sort of like the realist social theorists who thought people in the other building, what they were teaching was going to be the end of civilization, right? But it's all just sort of like white theorists and philosophers talking to each other about who's going to destroy what, as if their comfortable positions are going to be impacted. But I think that kind of culture war around theory kind of died out, the postmodern wars, if you will. And I think there's been an attempt in the current reactionary backlash to stir it up again. And I think there's been a lot of academics who have been weaponizing this. James Lindsay and the kind of like the grievance studies crew, the intellectual dark web. They're trying to talk the language of theory, and maybe a lot of them are digging into that old work, or they were students back then. I don't know. But they decide to create these kind of like figures of hate who will destroy the world or Western white civilization, heterosexual civilization, or with their theory. Now, I mean, being an academic, I mean, like the idea that like not only we could have that level of impact, but theorists of all. And I'm not going back with theory. I'm not criticizing theorists, but like the one thing you don't think going like this is who's going to have the greatest impact of all the academics. It's going to be the philosophers. Do you know what I mean? On a concrete kind of material level. But I think what's also happened is you have a lot of reactionary academics fueling this. So these are also the experts that will be listened to. You have the kind of the left behind theorists, demographers, and you have these people who are telling a right wing, often racist government what they want to hear about the British population's interests and what they want their politicians to do, right? So you have that, but you also have this whole kind of sort of theoretical, cultural, pseudo-academic vanguard. And often like, you have Spiked, for example, and the sort of Academy of Ideas and all these kind of organizations, which are, I mean, some of them are now House Lords, in position. They've spent the past period of time under sort of like, the theories of Frank Ferretti, like telling us what is bad in this culture, what has changed. And what is the weirdest thing is Freddie has this whole idea of a culture of fear. They're all about moral panics, but they stir up moral panics. But they stir up moral panics about the left, about anti-racists, about trans activists. They about the threat to free speech, and they're telling a conservative government what they want to hear.
Absolutely.
And I think that I mean, you also have big name critics of Trumpism, etc. But you have this academic kind of like wannabe vanguard who are filling right wingers and policymakers who often, some of who aspire to be intellectuals, Steve Bannon, for example, with ideas about critical race theory and Foucault and postmodernism. And I mean, if you dig down, I mean, we were talking about the definition of fascism. you want to hear terms that are overused in like bizarre ways that are virtually meaningless, and only used in weaponized ways. It's ironic that you're talking about theoretical concepts where there's virtually no understanding of what the theory is or the meaning. And critical race theory is, in some ways it may seem dangerous for them because it's got a critique of systemic racism and systems of racism, but they don't know that. They just think everything that's anyone who says something about racism is a critical race theorist.
Literally, it's like, I mean, you saw Nigel Farage on Twitter. He says, I hope Sadiq Khan is happy for putting up, is proud of supporting a Marxist organization of BLM. I'm thinking, again, exactly speaking to your point, these terms are only used when they're weaponized.
Yeah.
Because I
Oh,
guarantee they don't have any idea of what critical race theory is. They couldn't tell you what it talks about. They couldn't tell you what Foucault talks about. They couldn't tell you what Marxism is. And but no, but this again, I think that so many countries have like great myths that they're built upon, almost
yeah.
like these foundational stories that they're built upon. So, for example, you have people in America who will say things like, we beat communists. I mean, they couldn't tell you what communism is or where communism was located in part of the world, but they say, this is what we're built upon. So naturally, it's easy to weaponize, just call BLM a Marxist organization and get it over and done with.
Yeah.
Just kind of my last point would be when I saw Dr. Cornel West kind of dunking on Tucker Carlson Tucker, I think it is,
Yeah.
on Fox News and saying that, about democratic socialism, and he looked really confused. And again, it's just for me, that was just exemplified of, what the culture war is, as it were.
I mean, you have to think about it, right? There's like this bunch of adults who kind of like, I mean, they're terrible racist reactionaries.
Yeah,
They've
yeah.
got this vocabulary. They're going like, it's woke, triggered, snowflake, Michel Foucault, postmodernism, cultural Marxism, deconstruction. It's like these words are radically different orders. They're like, you don't know what half
Exactly.
of them mean. Some of them are like memes. Like you have this like,
Literally.
it's a sort of completely untethered vocabulary and system of a repertoire of memes and like proper words and like deep developed theoretical schools of thought. It's like,
Literally.
and they just throw them at whoever they don't like. I mean,
Literally.
but that worked. Like in a
Yep.
sense, that meant that, I mean, anyone who heard these, like, I mean, I've been in conversations like, with people who've like, never opened up a sort of Foucault like
Yeah.
piece of writing. Just go, well, Michel Foucault is like a problem. Like, what? Like,
And
and in fact, a lot of the left is turned on Foucault.
I know, I noticed that, but I think it's very telling. Just like when I hear some people speak about it, it's almost as if they are like first year philosophy students and never heard these things, and they think, oh, and their whole worlds have been shaken. But again, I
Yeah.
think it's very deliberate. I think they've been weaponized for a purpose and politicized for a reason, and especially in this moment in time.
Yeah, which what
Um,
you're saying funny. You have this group of intellectual vanguards who
mhm.
are always complaining that we're at the end of civilization and white men can't get on the syllabus anymore, and no one even cites white men, and their entire repertoire for understanding the threat is Foucault, Baudrillard, Derrida. Like it's like, yeah, I mean, it's just the theorists are all or somehow fit the profile they think doesn't exist anymore. It's almost like it's this accidental plot to bring them back. But then the actual it's interesting because aside like most of the black and female scholars who they cite
Yeah,
are also academics,
yeah,
or some of them, but they also write popular books. And they're actually
yes,
not reading their journal articles. They're not reading their like academic books often, right? Yeah, it's just very odd construction of who the enemy is and how the literature is assembled.
absolutely, absolutely. And this has been an insightful conversation once again. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this once again. Guys, you're listening to the Malcolm Effect with Mamadou. Please like, comment, subscribe, be that on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or on Spotify. And until next time, take care.